go on to the third and last talk in the ST 44.1, that is the Buddha silence and the Buddha, or the Buddha's silence. And the key idea today is truth and time, or truth, time and silence, if you like. In the Abhaya Rajakumara Sutta, M58, we have a list of occasions the Buddha said that he would speak or he would not speak. Now, there are 6 occasions listed. Okay? First of all, the Buddha says that he would speak something that is true, useful, and pleasant at the proper time. Number 2, he would speak something that is true, useful, but unpleasant also at the proper time. And these are the only 2 of the 6 occasions that the Buddha says he would say anything at all. Now then there are 2 more occasions. Something which is true, useless, but present. Of course here the Buddha would not speak such a thing because this amounts to frivolous talk, one of the wrong speeches. Number 4, we have something true but useless and also unpleasant. This also the Buddha would not speak because it amounts to slander or divisive speech. Now in between this 7 and 8, we can add 2 more just to make the list complete. Something, speech which is false, useful, and pleasant. And this is unlisted. Now notice this one is false speech, right? Something false, but useful and pleasant. Obviously this would be like the talk of a con man, for example. In fact, interestingly, this is the kind of speech that we often find in the Mahayana conception of skillful means. Take for example the parable of the burning house. The old man who owns this big mansion finds his old mansion burning and the children are playing inside. And he tried to call them out, but they won't come out. They were engrossing their playing. So he tells them a fib, a lie, saying that he has 3 wonderful carts with well-adorned carts adorned with precious stones, drawn by 3 animals, a goat, a deer, and an ox. Well, when the children, for some reason the children got very excited and came out, but they found only 1 cart with a white ox. We don't have such stories in early Buddhism. These are later stories, later texts written by sectarian teachers. So there we have this 5th category, something false but useful and pleasant. So as I said, Buddha would not use such a speech. Now the 6th kind of speech is false, useful but unpleasant. Here of course we have something like harsh speech, which the Buddha would not use. Number 7, okay, this is we're back to the list. We have something false, useless, pleasant. Right, so here maybe a joke, okay, just to make someone laugh. False, useless, pleasant, okay. Something untrue but it's funny. So here it's regarded as frivolous talk. But here again we might say nothing serious here. For example, let's say a father trying to make the children happy, right? So it's not that bad, although a monk or a normal teacher would not indulge in such a speech. Number 8 is false, useless, unpleasant. And here, of course, again, we have an example of slander, right? So here again is the kind of speech which should not be used. So all these 8 kinds of speeches, the Buddha would only speak something true, useful. It can be pleasant or unpleasant, and they are spoken at the right time. When we say spoken at the right time, that means there are occasions when the Buddha would be silent, in other words. And if the Dharma, for example, is taught at the wrong time, it might be unbeneficial or even bring harm to others. How is that? Let's take example, is when someone is driving and then the teacher or the monk is teaching the Dharma and the driver is distracted, right? Right? In a sense, even there are rules actually where I think a monk or a nun is not allowed to teach to someone when they're traveling. So I think that makes sense in this case. So timeliness, kalina is important here. And of course, how we present this teaching, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant. Sometimes sometimes an unpleasant teaching may be given. How is that? We have to remind people of impermanence, for example, of suffering maybe. Or we may have to tell someone he's wrong. So it's not easy. Okay? Of course, here is how it is told. We may comfort ourselves by reminding ourselves that even the Buddha, when he teaches, sometimes people do disapprove of him. People even reject his teaching. So this is where we should not feel that we also should be perfect and whatever we say, would be praised and accepted by others. Not necessarily so. But once the Dhamma seed is sown, or when the Dhamma seeds are sown, it's just a matter of time with the waters of compassion, or with the waters of wisdom and the warmth of compassion, the seeds will grow. So just give it time, in other words. In other words, when we do say something unpleasant but necessary, we should say these things with loving kindness and compassion. And although at first we may face difficulties, but in due course, people will know we will be understood and even commended. Now, so this is the approach to be remembered, especially when we speak the Dhamma, whether the Dhamma teaches or not, that to say something which is true, useful, which can be pleasant or unpleasant, but at the right time. Then there are 4, in terms of time, there's a sutta called the Chatukala Sutta, the discourse on the 4 times. These refer to the 4 practices we need to follow, 4 things we need to practice for our own personal development. First, listening to the Dharma. Second, discussing the Dharma. Third, meditating for stillness, mental stillness. And 4, meditating for insight. Now, obviously it takes time to learn, and there's always the right time for learning. So we should organize our time, prioritize our lives, so that there's always time to study the Dharma, to go to the suttas, to take our time to connect the teachings, reflect on them, in other words. And once we have some understanding of the sutta, then we discuss them with others who also know the suttas. Now there's a problem here, because today we know, we can easily know the Dhamma, because there's so much Dhamma books available, the Tripitakas of the various South and Southeast Asian traditions are all available. Pali is very easy to learn. A lot of people know Pali. So that's, in other words, people know the suttas very well. There are many good translations. At the same time, there are also the texts of other Buddhisms are also available, and there are more and more good translations. Of course, many more texts remain to be translated. Now my point is, you find that a lot of Buddhists or Buddhist teachers, they know the teachings very well. But there's a big difference between knowing the teaching and experiencing it. In other words, really feeling the calmness and the freedom of the Dharma. A lot of people, both the teacher and the students, the audience, mistake the idea of talking a lot, knowing a lot, even giving good answers as characterizing someone who is of some spiritual depth. Not necessarily so. For example, we know very well, it is common where a Mahayana speaker talks down or even denigrates Theravada Buddhism, the small vehicle, and so on. And we find Vajrayana speakers claiming that their teaching is the only superior teaching. We still hear such, what should I say, outdated and unfriendly remarks, which clearly betrays the lack of any spiritual depth in the speaker. So any learned person, any informed Buddhist would be saddened by such events and would shy away from them. So this is where to know the Dharma also means to practice it. And when we talk about the Dharma, it's not just sounds that we hear. It is also the calm and clarity that we feel inside us. Remember, we are moved by the Dharma inwardly. We are moved to feel the peace. I remember once I sat for 2 hours with Ajahn Sumedho, one of the senior-most monks among Ajahn Chah's disciples. He spoke to me for 2 hours on the Vinaya. We were both monks then. I was still a monk. And I was sitting in the Thai style with the legs, we say in Thai, Nang Papir, that means put both the legs backwards, which can be very uncomfortable if you're used to it. That's the way the Thais would sit, the monks and nuns would sit. And there I was listening to his talk for 2 hours on the Vinaya. He was a very peaceful monk, and that was like over 45 years ago. But I still remember how I felt then, very peaceful, and that peace is unforgettable. Although I don't remember the words that it said, but I remember the peace very well, and it inspired me to work hard to dedicate myself to the Dharma. So the point here is that the Dharma is not to convince us who's right, who's wrong. The Dharma is not about which teaching is right, which teaching is wrong. And we often get this kind of interesting rivalry, even amongst Dharma teachers. Recently I received an email from a Mahayana friend. He writes to me, he sends me a Pali passage and a Chinese passage from one of the Samyutta Suttas, where the Buddha claims that he found a way, then the monks or the Shravakas follow him. I suppose this Mahayana friend is trying to tell me, say something like, look, you know, the Buddha is the big guy, and then the Arhats are all the small guys, and the Arhats still have to become Buddhas. Of course, that's not at all what that sutta is about, because there's no such teaching in early Buddhism at all. But the point is, it's a pointless situation here. There's nothing to argue about, because if we really want to learn the Dharma, we should be seekers, not to come and prove a point for the sake of some sectarian glory or simply for argumentation, which is against what is taught in the Alagadupama Sutta, in the parable of the water snake. So here, the Dharma should transform us. The Dharma should change our lives to help us let go more and more of our views. as we approach the mountain, we don't see the mountain anymore. We are in the mountain, experiencing the beauty and the health of the mountain. We are the mountain after that. So that's the way the Dharma should work for us. When do we discuss the Dharma then? When both sides have this deep curiosity, wanting to know the Dharma. Maybe one side is very inspired. They say, wow, I've discovered this beautiful teaching in the Sutta. I want to share it with you. And the other side listens and questions, and you find there is this wonderful connection, moving together on the path, discussing the Dharma. And there's so much we can learn to improve our teachings and cultivate inner peace through such discussions. This kind of Dharma discussion, again, is to help us practice the Dharma. So, in other words, the more we know the Dharma, the less we need to know of the Dharma. It's like a journey to this forest of words. And finally we come to the one tree, the Bodhi tree. And we see the bright light and the peace. So there comes a time when we just do nothing. We have finished the study, the teaching is so clear, we feel very peaceful. We sit down, we meditate, and experience mental stillness, samatha. We feel so happy, we feel so satisfied, and we feel this joy, peace. We go on cultivating this joy and peace. That's the third practice. It's not exactly a particular meditation, it's part of a practice, a step in mental cultivation. And as we calm our minds down, there's a lot to talk here. For example, we can talk about getting rid of the 5 hindrances and so on, perhaps in another occasion. When the mind is very calm, very clear, when the mind is very calm, it becomes very clear. In other words, we have sat very calmly, very peacefully, joyfully, right? We come out to meditation, we spend a quiet moment remembering, recollecting, examining this mind, reviewing the practice. We should not be thinking. The reality is we do not think when we are really at peace with ourselves. We're just enjoying the peace. And we will come out of it, yes, when the mind starts working again in a sense of knowing. Then we reflect on the nature of impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and non-self, right? So, in a way, this is the insight aspect, where we use this calm mind to reflect on these deep teachings, examine the true realities that the Dharma point to, so that we build up our wisdom through this practice. So there you have the 4 practices of listening to the Dharma, listening to the Dharma also means studying, reading about the Dharma, discussing the Dharma, meditating for stillness, and meditating for insight. So in other words, two aspects make use of words, listening to the Dharma, studying the Dharma, discussing the Dharma, and 2 practices are those of silence, the silence of meditation. Now, one of the key teachings of the Buddha, of course, are embodied in the Four Noble Truths. And here, again, we can question ourselves about the Four Noble Truths. Why are there 4 truths? Sometimes the Buddha speaks of 2 truths. So this is another area that we will quickly look through and try to relate it with some understanding of how this brings us inner silence. The Four Noble Truths are, as we know, are like the way a doctor looks at a patient and says, well, first the doctor identifies the situation, the disease or the condition, and then gives the diagnosis, the cause, and then how to end it, and finally it gives us the medicine. And that's one way of looking at it. I think the older formula is that of stating the number one, suffering, that is the state of true reality, and number two, you have the conditions that bring it about, the arising of suffering. Number 3 and 4 are reversed in the older formula, I think, where number 3 would be the method. In other words, how to start working to end this suffering. And then number 4 is the actual ending itself, nirvana. That will be a very neat kind of like a progression on the path. Okay? But in terms of teaching, the Four Noble Truths, which we are familiar with, is more helpful in manner of speaking. Okay, those are the 4 truths, right? But very often the Buddha says that he is silent on all other teachings, but he only teaches one thing. To Anuradha, the Buddha says, one thing do I teach him, only one thing, and that is suffering and the ending of suffering. So ending and suffering or ending are regarded as one thing, not 2 things. And the second important point, that's all we really need to know. All else, let it be silent. Now from this teaching of suffering and the ending of suffering, there's a lot we can talk about in terms of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist aesthetics, and of course Buddhist practice. In terms of Buddhist philosophy, we can say that this twin truth talks about meaning of life and purpose of life. In the first truth, in other words, answers the question, what's the meaning of life? And if you look around, what do you see in life? What meaning does it give us? It means to live is to discover we are incomplete, to discover there's something missing in our life, and that is suffering, that is pain. The meaning of life is that there is suffering. But it doesn't stop there. It means we have to learn something. We have to learn why is it like that, what's going on here. So that's the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to understand this suffering and to overcome it. That's the second part, the ending of suffering. And on a more elaborate scale, you have the 12 links. So the dependent arising is an elaboration on this meaning of life part of the truth. That is the first of the 2 truths here, the arising of suffering. Then you have the dependent ending. That's how suffering ends. That's the purpose of life. So this is the gist of Buddhist philosophy, if you like. And what about beauty? Aesthetics, Buddhist aesthetics can also be found in this twin teaching. We have suffering, ending of suffering. Suffering here is the truth. It is something real, something you see out there. Then the second noble truth, the ending of suffering, is something beautiful, pleasant. So you have truth and beauty. And in the poetry of kids, you remember the kids say the beauty is truth and truth beauty, and that's all we need to know. So this is where truth and beauty can also summarize Buddhist practice, in other words. So the truth of Buddhist practice is to understand the nature of life, the meaning of life, through observation, through experience, and with that we begin to see the truth. The truth will set us free. And when we feel free, even for a moment, we feel joyful, we feel happy, and we begin to see the ending of suffering. So that is the beauty aspect. Suffering ends, and we feel at peace with ourselves. So we have beauty and truth. Okay? We can also on a spiritual level, use this two truth model to talk about meditation. The four focuses of mindfulness, if you like. So now the first truth encompasses suffering, right? And the second truth, the ending of suffering. So we can look at, say, in the case of the four satipatthanas, we begin with the contemplation of the body, right? So when we look at this body, what do we see? We see this body as impermanent. We see this body as made of parts. So there are many ways of examining the body. We reflect on the body. So the first satipatthana is a body-based meditation. We use the body as our teaching model, if you like. We reflect on the body. So when you go on reflecting on the body, just as it is, not what you want it to be, then you see the reality of our body. So this brings us peace of mind, inner peace, right? So that is the contemplation of the body. We come to a point, we can say, that is called the silence of the body, right? That's what happens when we sit down, say, to do breath meditation. When we sit quietly, then we close our eyes, we let go of our other senses. We silence the body, we settle the body first. So this is the first satipatthana, the first focus or foundation of mindfulness. Then in the second one, contemplation is called contemplation of feelings, right? The first satipatthana is called kayanupassana, recollection of the body. The second satipatthana is called vedananupassana. Okay, we're on page 24. 23, okay, almost 23. So when you watch the body, what do you notice? You notice feelings. Right? Again, when you look at feelings, you notice feelings change, they're impermanent. You have happy feeling, you have painful feeling, you have pleasant feeling, painful feeling, neutral feeling, right? And they kind of move around, they switch about. So we reflect on that, and then we get this, again, the silence of feeling. When we accept them as they are, we're not troubled by them anymore. We have the silence of feeling. Then we go on to the third practice, that is contemplation of the mind, citta-nupassana, mind-based meditation. Here again, we watch the rise and fall of thoughts, how our thoughts come and go, without following those thoughts. And then after a while, you find those thoughts settling, we're not troubled by them anymore. Then you have what is called the silence of the mind. Then comes the last satipatthana, the last focus of mindfulness, the contemplation of reality, or contemplation of dharmas, which is a dhammanupassana. Here, as we sit calmly in the peace of our minds, we notice experiences of impermanence, of the Four Noble Truths. We begin to notice the hindrances more clearly. We understand the nature of reality, in other words. And in doing so, again, we calm ourselves. And we let go even of this, all this knowledge, if you like. This is called the silence of reality. And if you can do that effectively, then you attain jhana, and you go on to a higher level of understanding, of mental cultivation. In other words, this is the level where we let go of the conventional level of truth, and we go on to see directly. In other words, conventional level of truth means we use words, even thoughts and ideas to understand what's going on. But then as we understand things more clearly, we experience all this truth directly. So this is on the spiritual level, okay, directly. Of course, here also, in a sense, we use ideas, we use concepts, but it's more direct. In other words, reality-based experience, if you like. And this is called the silence of experience. And And then from there we proceed to the jhanas, and in a jhana you might say it's a kind of even deeper level of silence, total silence even if you like. And then when you attain nirvana, that's called absolute silence, in a manner of speaking, yeah? Although in Buddhism we don't like to use the word absolute, but here we can use it provisionally. Absolute silence in the sense that there's nothing more silent than that, so to speak. Or if you like, ultimate silence, silent nirvana. Now when we talk about meditation, we know very well there is this noble silence, right? Silence, meditation and silence are closely, intimately connected. When we talk about noble silence, it refers to jhana practice, deep meditation, especially the second jhana. When you reach that level, language as we know it ceases to function. Even initial application and sustained application, the very subtle remnants of our thoughts fade away. So there is this beautiful silence, this great peace. That's called a noble silence. Now, teachers mention this word, noble silence, and lots of pious lay devotees are very excited by it. So suddenly you see this word noble silence pasted all over the temple walls and many places you go to. But nobody pays heed to this. Notice, for example, I even noticed once this sign we put up in the kitchen of our places, and people just go on talking and eating. I think we should respect noble silence to mean what it means. It's a silence of the dhyanic mind. So when we put on the wall, we just say silence please, quiet please. I think that's what we should do, otherwise we may confuse the teaching. So noble silence refers to this very deep state in meditation. And of course there are occasions when it can mean simply meditation, especially in the suttas, where the Buddha tells the monks when you assemble, either you talk Dhamma or observe noble silence, in other words, meditate, if possible, to attain jhana. So here we can say when the Buddha says observe noble silence, it means to meditate. So it's possible to have that kind of meaning. So of course, if you use the word please keep the noble silence during a retreat context, that should be alright, I think. So that is called, otherwise this notice you see on the wall, it means the rule of silence here. Okay? So those who meditate and they have attained levels of silence and they are truly at peace with themselves, or even awakened, these are the earliest kinds of Buddhist sages. They are called the Muni, M-U-N-I, Muni, the silent sage. They are called silent because their minds are at peace, no more thoughts as we have them. And the state of such a silent stage is called Moneya, the silence of wisdom, if you like, or the silence of sagehood. So this is where the mind has been tamed and silent and peace, like a mirror reflecting true reality outside. Now, taking a step as it were, okay, you find the Buddha being silent on the 10 points. The Buddha doesn't discuss philosophy, in other words. So here, sometimes the silence is misunderstood. Again here, it's only not in the Buddha's case that sometimes people misunderstand why he does not answer their questions. We have another famous case regarding Socrates. It's recorded in the text called Clitophon. It's about this man called Clitophon. He's a questioner. He accuses Socrates. Of course, Socrates does not answer his question. So he says, one of two things must be true. Either you know nothing about it, or you don't wish to share it with me. Right? So he's accusing Socrates, either you don't know, or you're ignorant, or you know it, but you do not wish to share it with me. Therefore, you're silent. But the point is, Socrates was silent for a third reason, not neither of these two. He does not want to say anything because Cleitophon was arrogant, very proud, but ignorant. So Socrates realizes that whatever he says will not help Cleitophon, so he rather be silent. So here we have a very familiar case where the Buddha himself does just this. In other words, this is not a problem with the Buddha or Socrates, it's rather a problem of language, if you like. Somehow, language cannot be used in this case to help the questioner. So, it's not the right time, in other words, to answer the question. So, the silence, in other words, leave a kind of open end. In time, when this person is ready, like Vacchagotta, the Buddha did not answer his question about whether there is a soul or there is no soul. And then Vacchagotta comes back later on and kind of asks other questions, and he becomes enlightened. So here is where the good teacher, in other words, knows whether the student is ready or not. He doesn't always answer the questions, but the questioner should be ready. Of course, there are occasions when the Buddha, in his compassion, does ask the audience if they have any questions. For example, the Buddha on his deathbed, while the Buddha is passing away, lying down on his right side, and there are these like father monks assembled before him, and he asks the monks, if you have any questions, anything you're not sure about, this is the time you can ask. So not all of them were silent. They somehow had no questions. So the Buddha asked them 3 times, and 3 times they were silent. And Ananda then intervenes and say, Bhante, they have neither doubt nor misgivings. And here the Buddha replies, says yes, he says he knows, because all of them were arhats, except one, that is Ananda, was a stream winner. So here, in other words, they all were saints. Maybe they're not arhats, they were non-returners, or once returner, and the least is the stream winner. So the Buddha says, obviously they have no doubt or misgivings. So here, in other words, the Buddha asked them if you have any questions, meaning perhaps they want to know some final instructions, something like that, and they had none of those questions anyway. So now the question is the Buddha's silence here true silence? Is he always silent on the 10 points? Not so really. The interesting thing is there is at least one occasion when the Buddha, in a way, does speak on the 10 points. That is to the person called Uttiya in the Dasaka Uttiya Sutta, A1095. Here, when they asked the Buddha answers, it says that no, I do not answer. I do not say that, okay, number 1, I do not say this, number 2, this teaching is left undeclared. So in a sense, there's also silence, and interestingly, this is the silence of words, if you like. The Buddha is just confirming that he doesn't make any statement on any of these 10 points, and he lists them himself. So, what is spoken by the Buddha, or what we should discuss, therefore, should be something useful, something that contributes to our spiritual life, to our practice, our cultivation, development on the path, in other words. And this is called a profession of faith, if you like. A profession of spirituality, if you like. So this is the whole meaning of the term to profess a religion. That means to commit yourself to practicing that, to the Dharma in this case. So we are not really yet Buddhist. We are really practicing, and we are not yet attaining any level, at least remaining, technically speaking, strictly speaking, we're not really Buddhist. Or if we use the word Buddhist very generally, then we can say we are not on the path yet, or more technically, we are not saints yet, so to speak. But that's good enough, we are on the way. And on a darker note here, we can say that the word profession today has changed in meaning. That the profession means to have a job, and a well-paying job. So that we have monks who take up a career with their academic degrees, especially a PhD, and then you find themselves gainfully employed in the universities and so on. So these are called career monastics. Of course, if they earn money and they follow this kind of worldly career, of course, then they've broken the rules, and it's quite troubling if they examine whether they are practicing or not. Usually they're not serious about Vinaya, and this is a growing negative phenomenon which I think we should not encourage anyway. I mean, if you want to be really a good academic, you can just be a lay person and be a brilliant academic. So here is where there is too much worldly noise if you take that kind of a path. And silence must be a virtue in Buddhist practice, right? Because silence here means being at peace with ourselves so that wisdom arises. So if we are busy making money with a career, we cannot really be at peace with ourselves, and therefore we will never be enlightened in this life. And here again, there's a time for silence, and there's a time to talk. And when we teach the Dhamma, that's the way also. We're going to sometimes be silent, sometimes we talk. And you find the Buddha doing just this. There are occasions when he's asked a question and he just keeps silent. And one of the most famous cases is when King Pasenadi asked the Buddha about the destiny of Queen Malika, who had just passed away. Now, Queen Malika was a very virtuous queen of Pasenadi, and she has passed away. But because of a negative act she did, she recalled this act with guilt, and she was reborn immediately in a suffering state, in hell in fact. For 7 days, 7 human days, she was suffering in hell. And each day the king thought of asking the Buddha, where is she reborn? And somehow the Buddha either avoided to answer or distracted him with some other teachings. Then on the 8th day, she was reborn in Tusita, and that's when the Buddha happily answers the question, tells the king, well, Queen Malika is reborn in a happy state. And the king, of course, was very happy. Because this king, being a king, was not really peaceful enough, quiet enough, wise enough, so to speak. So imagine if the Buddha had told him the painful truth and said, oh, this queen was reborn in a suffering state, then he would be shocked and say, oh, how can such a virtuous woman be reborn in a suffering state? So the Buddha, in a sense, kept silent momentarily to prevent the king from being shocked, being unhappy, losing faith, cutting his Dhamma roots. So that's the farthest extent the Buddha would go in not teaching the Dhamma. There's no lying involving there, just withholding the truth until it's the right time to be told with happy effect. Now we come to the next important point. The word ineffability and silence, are they the same? But in the Dharma, in our talk here, they are different. Okay? Because when we talk of the 10 questions, the silence of the Buddha, there is simply a silence of language. But there are some things we can talk about, like say nirvana, and that's where we use the term ineffability, where language cannot be used to express or to explain such a state, in other words, because these are states beyond human language, in other words. So in the case of the 10 points, it is a deliberate silence on the Buddha's part, and in a sense, if we do not want to get lost in words, we too would not discuss or talk about such any of the 10 points, in other words. But on the other hand, when nirvana is concerned, we can try to talk about nirvana, but it's still not nirvana anyway. The word is not the thing, because it is something to be experienced. However, it's like we're looking at a beautiful night sky, beautiful cloudless, moonless night sky with millions of stars, and that's where you can only see it. You can't really, well, you can try to talk about it, how beautiful it is, but it's still not a real experience. In other words, these are things to be experienced by yourself. On the other hand, something so profound as nirvana, we can try to explain it, but we have to use what's called negative language, apophatic language, apophasis. In other words, not this, not that, So you just kind of keep on cancelling lots of things. You can try to cancel everything out, but still not nirvana yet anyway. But it kind of points in that direction. So we come to the conclusion now. In silence, what have we learned about silence? The first kind of silence that we should understand is the silence of the body, right? That what is the body? The body are the 5 senses, iron or stone body. And to really understand this about body, we have to be silent toward them first. Understand the nature of silence of the body. In that way, we look directly into it. And when for the body to be silent, speech also should be silent, to be given a rest, so to speak. Because speech is an activity of the mind, or speech is the active mind expressed, and the active mind uses words and language. It uses a medium. In other words, we are talking about the sunset, but we're not experiencing the sunset, in other words. So we have to just keep quiet for a while, let go of all those talking, just watch this beautiful sunset, listen to this beautiful music. Then there is silence of the mind, letting go of thoughts, so that our mind is clear and the truth will arise. If not, if we think too much, then it's like a snake biting its own tail, one thought leading to another thought, another thought. That's a simple way of putting it, but reality is actually one thought. Once it gets bitten, it explodes into 1,000 thoughts, and it's called papancha, an exponential increase of thoughts, until in the end we do not know what we're thinking about. So this is where the silence of the mind is another level of experience which brings us to greater wisdom. So to be really free, we have to really silence the mind at this momentarily, and then wisdom arises, and this wisdom tells us everything we need to know about reality. For example, one of the things we may realize is what is our body, what is our mind. Our body are but moving parts seeking the wholesome. Our body and mind, if you like, are moving parts seeking the wholesome. And there's no abiding self, there's no essence in this moving parts. Everything is working together, changing, moving. And once we understand this, then we let go of any kind of self-view. This is called the first fetter. To have a self-view fetters you to your body, to suffering. Number 2, once we let go of this concept, or all these concepts, ideas, ideating about self-view, then we have no doubt that we can be free. In other words, we just go on striving. We know that we need to strive. We cannot just depend on other people's words from outside, but we have to look within to discover the answer, and it's possible. Remember, not all religions teach this. It is an exception rather than a rule. In Buddhism, we say you can do it. Other religions say you can't do it. We must do it for you. Buddha says you can do it yourself. You need to do it yourself. Just like taking a meal, you have to eat it yourself and satisfy your own hunger. And finally, we do not rely on external agency. We do not look for answers outside. In other words, we stop being superstitious and we break the third fetter, the fetter of being attached to rituals and vows. So these are the three fetters of the fetters are self-identity, doubt, and attachment to rituals and vows. Once they're broken, you're well on the way to awakening as a stream winner. And it is just a matter of time. You will taste the sweet taste of the silence of awakening. And that's the highest silence you can get. So that ends our talk on the Buddha's silence. Let us now have a short reflection to close this study. In these 3 lessons, we have reflected on the nature of silence and how the Buddha explains them and uses them, and how we need to ourselves practice this inner silence so that we are truly at peace with ourselves and awaken to true reality. Reflecting in this way, we create very good mental karma. But above this karma, many other good things we have been doing, such as keeping the precepts, practicing meditation, learning the suttas, practicing charity, and so on. May we be well and happy in this life itself. And may we aspire to attain spiritual liberation, namely stream winning, at least in this life itself. In this moment of peace, let us send out our love and kindness to all the people here, all the beings here. May they be well and happy. And also to our loved ones, our teachers, and our friends and people we know. And may you too be well and happy. And may those whom the Dhamma have not touched to see the Dhamma for themselves and be liberated and be happy and practice spiritual friendship with all of us. May all beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.